Social media and news reporting help students and educators understand the growing role of social media in the gathering and dissemination of news information, along with many ways to integrate into traditional news outlets and online-based sources. This program teaches a variety of ways in which social media is essential to storytelling and news distribution. Each chapter highlights an element of social media used by top journalists who rely on these communication channels to both research stories and broaden their audience.
Uncharted territory. For the California Report, I'm Anna Tentopoulos.
San Diego is a major destination for international human trafficking. Young people, especially girls.
So I'm Scott Schaefer. I'm senior correspondent for KQED Newsroom, our new television show on Friday nights. Well, for people who love politics like me, reporting on politics is fun and interesting and always surprising. I used to work in politics. I worked as press secretary for Mayor Art Agnos back in the 80s. I was also chief of staff to State Controller Gray Davis up in Sacramento. So having been on the inside and then covering it from the outside is really a great experience for me. And I think it helps to really, I think that's a good experience to really have worked on a campaign or worked for a government official or even intern for one. I'm not saying all journalists have to do that, most don't, but I was kind of lucky to have had that experience. Covering politics can be a challenge in that, especially nowadays, it's very controlled. Campaigns have gotten, especially as you go up the food chain, I mean, up to president, but down even to governor's races and attorney general races, the handlers, the campaign consultants, they manage everything very tightly. They're afraid of their candidate or their elected official making a mistake. And so the frustration is that it can be hard to get them off their talking points, which is why when I interview somebody, I always try to have at least one or two questions that they couldn't possibly have thought about ahead of time. I interviewed UC President Janet Napolitano about her leading the games to Sochi, and I just thought it would be fun to ask her what sport she could imagine playing if she was in the Olympics. I'm sure they didn't prepare her for that. But it's nice to have a question like that at least you can be sure gets a human side of the person. Well, you start from the point that politics and policy are very much related, and government officials, elected officials, local officials, state and federal, are dealing with policies that have a real impact on people for better and for worse. And so whether you're doing a story about food stamps, or clean water, clean air, global climate change, whatever it might be, it helps to begin the story or soon after you start telling the story to include a person, a family, an individual, a doctor, a farmer, whatever it might be, to humanize it so you're not just talking about numbers.
I'm Thuy Vu, and I'm host of KQED Newsroom on KQED, the PBS affiliate in San Francisco. We look for an issue where we feel we can add something to the conversation. There's a lot of noise out there. Is this an issue where we feel we can give viewer value and viewer benefit by bringing in experts who can talk about it, who have a great background in it, who have the statistics, who have the analytical skills to really dive deep and give viewers and also listeners, because this show airs on the radio as well, and give our audience a broader understanding of something that maybe other news outlets only scratch the surface of. So we generally look for issues that are broad enough to do a deep analysis section on. So income inequality, obviously, we'll touch on the food stamp cuts and how the people who are receiving food stamps in California, the face of families that are and individuals who are receiving that has really changed dramatically in California. We'll talk about why. I mean, the best stories are always about people. So when you're given a story that's heavy on policy, always think about who that affects. Well, if it affects, Mrs. Jones, single mother of 5, well, go find Mrs. Jones, single mother of 5, and see how she lists the daily effects of a policy. And that's a good way to get into your story, to get people to feel compelled to watch and to feel like they have an emotional investment, because in one way or another they feel some connection to a real life human being who's affected by a policy. That it's not just some nebulous government law somewhere. These are real lives that are affected and people who have to find a way to cope with it every day.
Social media is increasingly important in what we do. Obviously, as a journalist, I'm tweeting out all the time what I'm doing. If I do an interview with somebody, I'll tweet out details of it ahead of time to kind of gin up some interest in it. And I'll send out pictures. But we all use LinkedIn, we use Facebook, Twitter, as just tools, for finding people, for tracking down sources, for getting out our message, and also getting the quick responses that politicians and others use on Twitter. It's become an unfiltered way for them to get to journalists, to give out, for example, an immediate response to a press conference or the State of the Union, whatever it might be. We do use Storify and Tumblr and all these different websites, Mashable, sites that have both interesting stuff and also ways for us to get out, to tell stories using audio and video and pictures and all that stuff.
What I'm finding out is that people really want to feel like they have a personal connection to you on social media, not your organization, not your media outlet. So there's a little bit of give and take. So I use it to solicit people's feelings or questions about an issue. For example, for this week's show, income inequality, everyone's talking about that. The president has talked about it. And I just simply put out something on Facebook saying that, well, it's going to be in tomorrow's show. The president wants this to be a top issue in his final years in office. What do you think I should ask our panelists about this tonight? And boy, a bunch of people wrote in with questions, and their questions were really interesting. So I use social media to engage, but I also use social media to inform.
Get to know the people around the elected officials and the government officials. Make friends in high places and in low places. People who you can call on a regular basis, develop your sources, people who work sometimes in the bowels of government, who aren't used to being quoted, and you don't even need to quote them, but they'll give you a heads up if they know of something that's happened or something that's coming down the pike.
Learn to listen. So often we come into an interview and we have a list of questions, and we're not really listening. We're really thinking more about, what next question am I going to ask, and will it come out perfectly? Well, that person might have told you something really fantastic, and you missed it because you weren't listening and you didn't ask the right follow-up question.
Writing is very important, and especially in broadcasting, it's a different kind of writing. At radio, you're writing to the ear. Television, you're writing to the pictures, but still for the ear because people are listening to you.
Learn to write, please. There are so many bad writers in the business, and I just hammer that message again and again. Work on your writing. It's a craft. It takes attention. It takes focus. But boy, if you can be a good writer, you have a leg up in this business.
I would say also, don't follow the pack. There's a lot of pack journalism. It's important to cover things like press conferences, but it's important to kind of go in the opposite direction too.
Write concisely, clearly, and compellingly. And if you can get those 3 C's down, you've got the makings of a pretty good career.
I'm Mike Lurie. I'm the political and investigative reporter for KCRA3, Channel 3 News in Sacramento. We're the NBC affiliate here. I cover the Capitol as much as possible. I love covering the Capitol, politics. For me, it's like having a window to history being made on a daily basis. A typical day, well, I guess there is no typical day because every day is different. That's what I like about it, is that every day is exciting. There's no real set agenda. You go in thinking you're going to cover a story, and sometimes you do, but sometimes things break. Sometimes the governor will have a press conference, or some lawmaker will introduce a bill, or you'll hear something in the hallways that, some lobbyist told you about some deal that was constructed on a napkin or something, and start to pursue that. That's what makes it interesting. It's the serendipity of the moment that anything can change. We follow Twitter a lot, obviously. I'm tweeting all the time because that's now become a good source of information. You have to verify it independently, double check, triple check, don't just take the word for it, but that's a good starting point. So I like the fact that every day is different in that it follows no set agenda. Sometimes the folks back at the station who set you off on one story and now you've got a better one don't always understand the fluidity of it, but that's the goal, is to make it as compelling as possible and come up with the best story of the day from the Capitol. Well, politicians love to talk about their agenda. They'll hold a news conference about a particular topic, or you'll talk to them about something a bill that they're promoting, something that they want to promote. It's important not to be caught up in the spin of what they're doing, because that's what they're there for. Their goal is to get reelected. They want to come back again and again. So if you can ask them that question about, and we do this with the governor all the time, he may call a press conference about, the water conservation plan, and yes, that's plan A for the day, but then maybe there's something else involving prisons, for example, and overcrowding and constitutional issues, or education or transportation or something else that you've been dying to ask. Well, there's your opportunity. There's your goal to do it. The unscripted moments are when you get the biggest amount of candor from politicians. I remember there was one state senator here years ago from the Bay Area who, if you set up an interview with her to talk about topic A, and then you said, okay, great, now what about topic B? She'd kick you out of her office and say, I didn't agree to talk to you about that. Well, hello, we have an opportunity as a forum to talk about all issues. And if you're the state senator from San Francisco, you're going to have to answer those questions. And if you don't, well, then we hold them accountable. I think you have to start with the basics, know how many legislators there are, that there's 80 members of the Assembly and 40 members of the state Senate, and how state government works, and that there's, a governor and a lieutenant governor and attorney general and all the state constitutional officers that can be voted for, and how that differs from the federal government or local government. So stuff that you learn in civics in high school is a good sort of platform, but you got to build on that and know the basics of what parties control the legislature, the politics of it. Having that basic understanding, I think, is an integral part of being a good reporter. You better be dialed in to LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. A lot of stations are using Facebook as an opportunity for viewers to weigh in on stories. What do you think about this bill involving transgender students? What do you think about this trend or that particular bill? And it's a way for the audience to weigh in, and then based on how many people follow that story or weigh in on the net, it will get traffic, and then the station knows where to place it in the newscast. Well, that one is one of our most watched stories on the web, so we're leading with that today. The most important advice is do your homework. Research the issue that you're covering for that day thoroughly, comprehensively, and do as much reading as you possibly can. Who are the key players in this game? Who are the proponents? Who are the opponents? Who does it affect most directly? Who can I talk to that will give me an unbiased, objective, nonpartisan opinion? Maybe there's a professor you want to seek out who's an expert on Middle Eastern affairs if you're doing a story about what's happening in Egypt today. And so to have that, and make sure you do your research so you can do the critical thinking, so that when you interview the politicians and they start going into spin mode, you can cut right through it and say, well, yes, Senator, but what about this? And what about that? Or 2 weeks ago, you said this, and now you're saying something completely different. Why the change? Let's say your day starts at 9:30. You better not start at 9:30. I start at 7:30, reading the papers, going through Capitol Morning Report, critically reading, San Francisco Chronicle, LA Times, Sacramento Bee. I draw a list of questions that I might want to ask. Who am I going to contact? Have, things in your phone, in your Rolodex, that people you can start calling. A little pre-planning really goes a long way.
The great thing about online reporting is it's got the immediacy of radio. You don't have to wait until a newscast is on. You don't have to wait until the paper gets delivered to be able to bring out the news. And then also, just like newspapers, you can go into some depth. My stories are a minimum usually of 600 words. And so you've got, when all things are working well, you've got the video of television, the immediacy of radio, and the depth of newspapers. What I use is what I call journalistic jujitsu, where I try to get as many aspects of a story as I can and make myself a little bit different than all the other many voices that are out there. What I mean by that is my background before I got into politics, I was a TV sports anchor for something like 20 years. And so I had this television background. And so I use something like the flip camera very, very often. It's not just a good use of being able to make sure I've got someone on the record and I can get their quotes accurately, but it's also a way for me to use sound bites, just like I did in television. On television, you can only basically use 12 to 15 second sound bites at the maximum. But online, I can use an interview, let's say I'm talking to someone about a very controversial subject. Instead of just a 12 or 15 second soundbite, I can run the entire 45-second soundbite. I only Facebook, tweet, use social media in relation to my stories. Once I write a story, I'll post it, I'll put it on Facebook, I'll put it on Twitter, all the other social media sites, and it works. I was a little bit reluctant at first, but it really works because, especially since the longer you're in this business, and I've been at this for 3.5 years here in Santa Fe, with each passing day, you get a few more people who follow you on Twitter, follow you on Facebook, and as a journalist, you work hard on a story. You want people to read your story, and the social media are great, maybe the best way to expand your voice, to have your story read and seen and get heard. My day as an online reporter really isn't much different as far as the news gathering aspect of it. Isn't much different than what your quote traditional reporter is going to be. I make phone calls, I'll check on sources, I'll sometimes take a story that someone else wrote, not just nationally, but also on a local basis, that maybe they didn't highlight something that I think is newsworthy, and I'll spin that off onto a story. So in many ways, as far as the news gathering goes, it's as an online reporter, you're not much different than a quote traditional reporter. You don't need to wait until someone gives you a job to do this. If you're interested in energy or the environment, what left, right, center, whatever it is, economics, go out and start your own blog. You make these stories interesting by appealing to what the average person out there wants to know. The average person doesn't have time in their day to know all the details, for example, of healthcare. So you can ask those policymakers the average question that the average person wants to know. Like, for example, okay, is this Affordable Care Act really going to be affordable? You're the advocate for your reader. And as long as you keep that in mind, you'll be in the right path.
My name is Doug Sovereign. I am a reporter at KCBS and for the CBS Radio Network first and foremost. I've come to social media after 25, almost 30 years already in the news business, so I've already got the basic tools and just apply them to a new medium. If you're starting from scratch, you have to start with the basics, which is when you go out on a story, make sure you get the who, what, when, where, why. Ask questions, don't take things at face value, think critically. Think about why someone's telling you something. Do they have some ulterior motive? Is there some truth behind what they want you to think is the truth? Those are valuable tools and lessons in any form of reporting. You're not just a stenographer, you're an investigator, you're a thinker, you're a reporter. You're not just someone taking down what they say and saying, okay, this is what happened. You got to think for yourself, open your eyes, open your ears, look around, listen. Something always leads you to something else. That's true in social media just as it is if you were out there with a pad and a pen on the scene of a breaking news story or a news conference or a routine feature story. You go into it without an agenda, without a preconceived idea of what the story is going to be, because it very often is not what you think it's going to be, it's something else. and you look at everything you can and observe everything you can and ask every question you can. That should be true no matter where you're getting your news, whether it's from an official, whether it's from a person on the street, whether it's from a witness, whether it's from a politician. Those same principles should be applied.
For Supreme Court ruling not on the merits of Proposition 8, but on the lack of legal standing by its authors to file a federal appeal, sends the case back to the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco.
Social media has changed everything about the way we gather and report news, apart from politics and investigative, just news in general. Twitter, for example, is almost like an unfiltered wire service that people can access themselves. The material that you're going to see on the AP wires and other wires in 10 or 15 or 20 minutes is on Twitter first. You have to be careful who it's coming from and vet it and make sure it's accurate, but you're getting the raw information that might, in the old days, have been phoned into a newsroom. Now people are tweeting it out. For me, social media it's another way to gain information these days, and it's a way to disseminate information. So it's another platform just like TV, radio, print. You've got to sort the wheat from the chaff and figure out what's legitimate, what's self-serving, what's valuable. Once I find something on Twitter, I'm not just going to go on the air and say, oh, guess what happened? This. No, you've still got to go through the regular journalistic principles and standards, which is confirm it, attribute it, source it. If somebody tweets out something that I can't confirm, I'm not going to report it. I might retweet it, which is slightly different, and say, this is from this person. I haven't confirmed it, but here it is. But I'm not going to go on the radio and say, this plane crashed and this is how many people were on it until I can verify that independently. I'm still going to apply the standards we use, which is attributed, sourced information from a reliable and trustworthy source, not just from some random person on Twitter. To get to the kernel of something, the absolute essence of what's important, and think, what is the most important thing here? Because I only have 140 characters to put it in there, or a paragraph if you're on Facebook. The abbreviations, the slang, what things stand for, how to abbreviate it and shorten it in a way that people still get what it is, even though you're not able to write a full sentence. But it's difficult to juggle all that, and there's a lot of pressure and demand that didn't used to be there before. They want you to take pictures for the website. They want you to be prepared to put something. We have a web maw that has to be fed. It's strong web presence. We've got a really good website. They want video, audio, photos, information, spellings of names, things that in the past you didn't have to care about. And that's true now no matter what medium you're in.
I'm Bert Herman. I'm the co-founder of Storify, and Storify is a social storytelling tool that lets you take media from all different social networks and combine them to tell a story that you post on Storify or can also embed on any website. I am a former journalist. I worked for the AP for 12 years, mostly as a foreign correspondent. I was covering the news, but really, we built Storify more as a technology platform that anybody can use, and it could be a professional journalist, it could be CNN or some organization, it could be a student journalist. It could actually be just anybody who feels like writing about something. It's really quite open, and we just create a platform for people to tell their stories by pulling together different social media posts. We do a little bit of editorial kind of oversight in that we feature stories on our homepage. So if something big is happening, we might decide to put that on the homepage, like Nelson Mandela passing away, world leaders go to South Africa to pay their respects. I mean, obviously that was a huge story, and we had lots of people using us to tell that story, including like the South African Broadcasting Corporation in South Africa, to CNN, to all sorts of people. So we feature their stories on the homepage because it was a big event, but we're not really trying to be a front page where you would go to learn about the world. We're just providing the platform, and you can take Storify stories and embed them on your own sites, which many of our users do. So it's actually a tool they can use back on their own sites where they're, where they have advertising, where they're making money through their own traffic. So really, I mean, Storify is just a different format, but it does not mean that we throw away everything we've learned about good writing, good storytelling. I think every story still needs to have a hook to grab readers and take take somebody on a journey, educate them. And what we're hoping to do is we're actually opening up the news to using many more sources. It used to be, you'd have your Rolodex. I guess nobody really has a Rolodex anymore, but some, contact list, and you call your experts that you always call, and you get their take on the news, and that makes up your story. Now you can actually get a much wider perspective, potentially, by being able to look at what people are saying on Facebook, on Twitter, or what they're posting on Instagram, what videos they're sharing on YouTube or Vine, or whatever new platform comes out. So hopefully it's a way that you could actually find voices that you might not have expected and different perspectives on a story. There's tons of noise out there. And that's really where journalists can play a critical role, is to come in and be the people who will sift through all this and find what matters among all that noise and make sense of it, to tell stories, to add context, and to help understand our world. There are more reporters out there. That doesn't mean there's more journalists out there. I always have to clarify what I mean in terms of the difference. I mean, people are reporting things, they're witnesses, but we still do need the journalists to find this and add context to it and explain what it means to a wider audience. Sometimes people attribute Storify, but actually, again, since we're a platform, I wouldn't necessarily say you should attribute things to us. I suppose it should be the person who was using Storify probably is the actual one who found something. And even going further, if it was a photo taken by, the person who took the photo of the plane landing in the Hudson, I mean, you'd want to go really to the source of where this information is coming from. I mean, because again, we're not a news organization in the traditional sense. We are not actually going out there and trying to cover certain stories. We're just providing the tools for people to do that for themselves. And the great thing about social media is you could actually say that you are checking things, that because it's not a paper that is printed and is kind of treated as the word of God once a day, you can actually kind of have an interaction with your audience. You can actually use your audience to help you fact check things. We have some great examples of people like Andy Carvin at NPR, who actually works with his audience to help track down what weapons are being used in the Syrian civil war, for example. I mean, really complicated, deep topics, reporting on issues that are of major importance in areas that journalists cannot get to, and kind of leveraging the power of the crowd. You should still evaluate sources the same way you would in any case. Does this person really have legitimacy to say what they're saying? Are they actually there, at the protest taking this photo, or did they just repost somebody else's photo? I mean, these are questions that came up in traditional journalism too, and now it's the same thing on social media. Writing for the web still seems to be grounded in print, which means you write it once and then the day is over, it's gone to press, and then the next day you start totally new because you don't have the same newspaper again the next day. But the web is dynamic. It's kind of, it doesn't just go in 24-hour cycles, it's on all the time. You can kind of drag and drop the different media into your story on the left side of the page and add text around it. And I would say, again, just like you would do for any story, write a compelling lead, make sure you're explaining what's going on, have a strong nut graph, explaining why this issue is important and the background and context, and kind of build your story from there. Now you can actually get a much wider perspective, potentially, by being able to look at what people are saying on Facebook, on Twitter, or what they're posting on Instagram, what videos they're sharing on YouTube or Vine, or whatever new platform comes out. So hopefully it's a way that you could actually find voices that you might not have expected and different perspectives on a story. And so I think really every journalist should be doing this for whatever beat they're covering.